Hello and welcome. I'm Deb Calvert, and I really appreciate you being here on the People First Potential channel on Bright Talk. Uh, I present here about once a month, and there's a whole library of content that you can go back and access. It's primarily for people who are committed to leadership development, managerial effectiveness, or personal effectiveness. You'll find a variety of topics to meet any of those needs. If you're new to Bright Talk, you should know that within any channel, there's usually a good archive of information. So go dig deep. You'll find lots of gold nuggets in there. But as you attend live or on demand workshops, there's something else that you should know about to get to the really good stuff. And that's that right under the video, you're going to see a tab called Attachments. I hope that you'll use that, take everything that's in there. One of the first things that you'll want to be sure to get is that I've put a copy of today's slides in there for you, a PDF of the slides, so that if you like to take that at the beginning and print it out and mark it up or whatever your process is, I encourage you to do that. I've also given you some other bonus materials and some pointers toward other related content that's either presented here in this Bright Talk channel, where we've been, I guess, 6 years now, presenting information about once a month. But also you'll find some links to People First Leadership Academy. That's a different platform. We use that one for our more interactive sessions. And so if you'll come on over there, we have a lot of fun with those. And I appreciate getting acquainted with you, having a chance to interact with you over there too. So the only other thing I want you to know about Bright Talk, it's an awesome platform. I really, really appreciate any feedback that you can give me, though. So your questions during the session for those who are live, your questions after the session via email for me if you're looking at this on demand. Either way, give me a review. Let me know at the end of the session, the end of the time that you view, how this worked for you and any pointers you might have that could help me do differently, better in the future. So I'm Deb, and I'm giving you some of my background and credentials just so you'll know where I'm coming from, what my perspective and point of view is. Probably most related to today's topic is that once upon a time, I was a Fortune 500 HR director. And in that role, I had a phenomenal opportunity to hire coaches and trainers across all of our major markets. And I developed a curriculum and then trained the trainers on how to be trainers and how to deliver on that curriculum. So that's where I first began thinking about the competencies for facilitators in a training setting. But I've learned over the past 17 years in business for myself that many of those competencies are more universally needed and relevant for people who are in business meetings. I think that's true now more than ever post-pandemic. We're all going to more meetings. The meetings are more impersonal, and frankly, they're harder to conduct because with people who are some in person, some not in person, all virtual, whatever your case might be, there's a sense of more impatience with meetings, and there are some really bad meeting practices that have become pervasive and that need to be addressed. So let's start with this. I'm going to ask you to think about your own business meetings and be honest as you're looking at your own business meetings. Is this the situation that you're in? Are you finding that your meetings are boring, irrelevant, poorly structured? Do people feel like they're a waste of time or that in some fashion going to meetings is not as productive as other work? Are your meetings ineffective? One of the ways they might be ineffective is if it's the same people, the leader or the extroverted group or the people with an axe to grind are the same people talking every time in every meeting. If any of those are true in meetings that you attend, the good news is that there's one common denominator that could fix all these problems in an instant. And that is to have a trained, qualified meeting facilitator. And I'm not talking about going and getting some sort of advanced degree. Becoming a trained, even certified meeting facilitator is actually pretty easy and faster than a lot of other types of certifications out there, mainly because it's a lot of common sense that goes into being a good meeting facilitator. I'm going to describe to you why that matters I'm going to talk about what it takes to be that type of a facilitator. Blah, 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 tripping over my words here. And I'm going to give you some resources. You'll find them in the attachments. I'll talk about them as we go. What you can do to immediately jump in and be a better facilitator. Here's why it matters. This is no small thing. Meetings do take a lot of time. Meetings do cost a lot of money. And unfortunately, in the typical business meeting, we've got lots of people who are distracted, who are doing other things. Maybe they're multitasking. They think that's the right thing. They think that's what they're supposed to be doing. And in fact, they're probably seeing examples like that right from the very top. 40% of people, especially when cameras are off in virtual meetings, they admit to actually dozing off, catching up on their Z's. And nearly a third of people think that meetings in their organization are the biggest reason, whether it's true or not. Meetings are the scapegoat for low productivity. And yet, if people are multitasking and they're not really listening during those meetings, they're doing their other work, it becomes a big question mark. Well, if you're still doing your regular work while you're at the meeting, then why is the meeting taking away from your productivity? And people are developing habits, right? They look like they're looking at the screen. They look like they're taking notes on the meeting. They look like through their learned behaviors, nodding and every once in a while giving an mm-hmm. They look like they're paying attention. This is all so much easier to do in virtual meetings. And yet, what they're really doing isn't contributing to the meeting, isn't making it effective, isn't advancing the outcomes that you hope to achieve in the meeting. So, as you know, it's problematic. And there's a cost to all of that, a big cost. As I said, we're all attending more meetings than ever before. The research around number of meetings pre-pandemic and post-pandemic is alarming. By any measure, most people are going to more meetings and they're more dissatisfied with the meetings that they go to. You might try this. Take an inventory at your next meeting. Who's there? How long are they there? And what's the average dollar amount that they each make per hour? If you do some breakdown and even just get in the ballpark, you can then multiply this out for each person there times the amount of time times the salary per hour. How much did that meeting cost your organization? And that doesn't even take into account the lost opportunity costs. If people weren't in that meeting, what else would they be doing that might drive revenue? So meetings can get really expensive. That's why you want to be judicious about when to hold a meeting and when not to. But it's also why you should make sure that the time spent in meetings is high value time. Why time spent in meetings is actually yielding something for the investment of time and money being made. Here's a scary number. Every employee is attending about 62 meetings per month. That does include one-to-one meetings and group meetings. But for the people who attend very few meetings, well, since this is an average, that means that there are some folks who are attending significantly more meetings. And for them, doing the math on how much money is being spent on their time in meetings, it can be pretty eye-opening. And it can certainly justify the cost of training a facilitator to make that time worthwhile. How much time do those 62 meetings take? Well, the average employee is spending 31 hours per month in meetings. There again, some are spending less, some are spending much more. And sadly, 2/3 of meetings are viewed as being unproductive and a waste of time. I'm guessing that many of you are here because you already understand, or at least intuit, the cost of meetings. You want things to be better. You'd like for you or someone in your organization, or maybe a group of someone's, to be more effective facilitating meetings and eradicating these kinds of problems. For those who are attending live, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. In the questions box, give me some feedback. What problems are you seeing with meetings? What caused you to sign up for and be attending a presentation about improving meetings? Just give me some insights because that'll steer how I take this conversation and where I focus as we proceed together. By the way, that's something else you should know about Bright Talk. We're not able to interact visually and vocally, but I can see your questions and I will respond to them for those who are attending live. As I said earlier, if you're not attending live, I strongly encourage you to email me. Let me know what questions you have later on because I enjoy those conversations that follow these sessions so much. I mean, that's really where the good stuff happens. All right. So put into that question box your thoughts about what it is that you'd like to address. How and why would you like your meetings to be better? I'm suggesting to you that a facilitator can solve for all these problems. So I probably ought to follow that up with defining what I mean by facilitator. What is it that a really good facilitator can do? A facilitator starts at the beginning, before the meeting ever happens, to determine what the outcomes ought to be for the meeting. These aren't catch-all meetings. These aren't free-for-alls. There are going to be on purpose, predetermined outcomes for the meeting. The facilitator asks those questions and narrows it down to make sure to understand what those outcomes are. Because everything else the facilitator will do during the meeting, before and after too, everything else will be driven by getting to that outcome, being able to work on the things that would cause that outcome to be realized. During the meeting, the facilitator is going to direct people toward that outcome. The facilitator will be like a guide taking people towards that outcome. The facilitator will help make sure that the extraneous conversations, things like lengthy, way too detailed, granular project updates, don't go into the meeting. The facilitator puts those on a parking lot or reminds people that those could be a more detailed email later on. The facilitator, having a grasp of what the outcomes can be, will keep people on that same page and keep the conversation moving progressing towards that outcome. Okay, so facilitators, really good ones, they also help to bring all voices into the conversation. They help to make sure that it's not just the loudest voices or the most senior folks that are being heard, but without putting people on the spot, without making people uncomfortable. Really good facilitators help folks to be heard, help folks to voice their questions. Good facilitators stimulate different points of view, and they bring them all into the mix for the good of the conversation, the group, and to serve those outcomes that are desired. What that means is that good facilitators are good listeners. They pick up on those little cues when people might have more to say because they were a bit tentative or they had a question in what they were saying. Good facilitators pick up on it when people are also trying to go a little too fast because they just want to cut to the chase and they don't want the voices in the mix, and the facilitator notices that and brings it back to the focus that doesn't leave people out. They read the room. Good facilitators read the room. They understand the people, they understand the outcomes that are desired. They get that engagement and that fuller participation by using techniques that help them to do that, by reading the people who are in the group, and by allowing for time for people to think and to test ideas and to make smarter thinking and decision-making processes. So all of that for some people is really exciting. It comes very naturally. For others, it feels a bit heady, right? I'm not sure what that would look like. I'm not sure how I would do that. But the good news again is that these are all acquirable skills. They're skills that anybody could acquire. And ideally in an organization, you'd have a whole lot of people who have these kinds of awarenesses and skills. Now, I will say I'm talking primarily from the point of view of somebody inside the organization, but there are some meetings, high stakes meetings, or meetings where every member of the team needs to be equally involved as a participant, or sensitive meetings related to things like like team building when there's been a breach of trust. For a lot of reasons, sometimes you do better to have an outside facilitator. And as someone who's done outside facilitation for over 2 decades, I think it's really a best practice to understand those outcomes before committing to be the outside facilitator and to be able to help an organization find internal facilitators when that would be more suitable. Either way, though, a facilitator is a person who makes things easier. Within that meeting, makes it easier for voices to be heard and for outcomes and action items to be developed and realized, makes it easier for people to collaborate, makes it easier for there to be structure and process, not for the sake of structure and process and not to an nth degree where it's burdensome to folks, but in a way that helps people achieve what they came to and to feel good and productive within those meetings. Here's how you'll know if you need a facilitator. In addition to all those meeting problems I showed you earlier, you can determine when a facilitator is needed inside or outside. If you have topics or deep dive work to do where it's very, very important to have high levels of commitment, where you really absolutely need to make sure every voice has been heard, when there will be big decisions that are made, when you need someone to be able to pull out of other people the questions they might have, the reservations they might have, the input that they don't even know they ought to be giving. They have some level of expertise. They just sort of assume everybody knows it. But so often that's not the case. If you find yourself rehashing the same topics over and over and over and going in an endless loop, you probably need a facilitator. Your group might be stuck. You need someone with certain skills to be able to move them forward and get to that place of action. And if you have a situation where every member of the group needs to be operating on an equal par, the group leader in this case needs to be a part of the group, not just the person at the front of the room guiding the conversation. An excellent example of this is any sort of team building. In those cases, you probably need an outside facilitator, at least outside your team, if not outside your organization. Now, I'm going to hit you next with the competencies of good facilitators. And I don't want you to be overly alarmed by this because it's a big list. In fact, what I'm showing you is only part of the list. But I'm going to show this to you in the interest of giving you an idea of who would be some of the best candidates inside your organization, who would be some of the folks who are most likely to be naturally inclined to being a good facilitator. Some of the folks who might really want to embrace and learn the skills of facilitation because they already have some of these traits that would make them exceptionally good facilitators. I said already that good facilitators are very good listeners. They listen to everyone, whether they agree with them or not. They listen to everyone, whether the style of the person who's speaking resonates with them or not. And they do that because they genuinely want or understand the need to extract information from each and every person in that meeting. So, good facilitators continually hone their listening skills. A companion to that skill is that they're very good question askers. They know, for example, that an open ended question is going to yield the floor and invite people to think and give deeper, richer kinds of responses. But by the way, if you are interested in developing question asking skills, there is a workshop next week for those who are here live. Next week over on People First Leadership Academy, we'll be doing the question asking workshop and it's free. So go over to People First Potential. The link is there in the attachments. Go over there and sign up for that class if you're interested. All right. So both in listening and in asking questions and in helping to guide the conversation, good facilitators are also good at staying neutral. They can compartmentalize, and their feelings about one person, one group, or one position won't interfere with their ability to maintain restraint. They're not going to jump in. They're not going to only put the things on the whiteboard that suit their own preferences. They will be a neutral party. Here's why an outside facilitator is sometimes a better choice for you, because if it's a very sensitive topic or one that has high stakes for everybody in your group, well, that's asking a lot to ask someone to be neutral in those situations. Good facilitators, they're responsive and they're nimble, right? They keep that outcome as their primary focus. They keep the needs of the group and the desire to bring everybody into the conversation at the forefront. And they are nimble because they haven't predetermined what every aspect of the meeting is going to look like. They don't say, it's 10:08, so now we must move to such and such activity or topic. Instead, they can adjust, and they have a lot in their tool bag that they can access to meet the needs, the outcomes that are desired. They do a balancing act between drawing things out of people while also maintaining a safe environment. Nobody feels put on the spot. Nobody feels called out or spotlighted, but everybody feels that they've been given an opportunity to voice their opinion. And they want to, because it's safe and because they've been shown the value of doing so. Good facilitators are collaborative. They see value in having a diversity of thought and opinions, and so that's why they mine for some productive conflict. It's why they mine for and invite in all of those ideas with the great questions that they ask. And last but not least, they have an empathy. They can understand, despite their own personal style, why certain folks always want to jump in and speak first and get really excited about things and tend to dominate. And they don't judge or restrain that in ways that are counterproductive. They also empathize with the people who need to reflect and think and have time to work out their ideas before they go public with them on the fly. Being able to empathize with both types of extremes in the people who are participating makes a facilitator more effective in getting to what the group needs from that discussion. Now, as I said, these are just some of the competencies, high level. There are others that can drill down. We do offer a course over there on People First Leadership Academy that gives a full list of facilitator competencies and has role plays and demonstrations to earn the certification. Facilitators work through and develop over the course of time the competencies that will make them really, really effective as meeting or as training facilitators. Okay, so that's what it looks like to facilitate. Let me give you some thoughts next about the kinds of things tactically that good facilitators are doing. That starts before the meeting. I already told you that they know the desired outcomes for the meeting. They have to, because otherwise, how can they plan and prepare and do a good job of reaching those outcomes? So they ask the questions like, well, why is it that we're having this meeting? What do you want out of this meeting? And what do you want my role to be? How do you want me to interact with your group? And that's whether it's internal or external. Sometimes it's important to get deeper level insights, not just from the leader of the group, but also from the other stakeholders, both those in the meeting and out of the meeting. Right? What is it that we need to understand more fully so that we can make this meeting effective and so we can reach those outcomes? Good meeting facilitators usually set an agenda, but they're not bound to every minute, every topic, because they're going to meet the needs of the group. The outcomes that are desired supersede the agenda. But having an agenda allows people to see what they can expect from the meeting, allows the facilitator to budget time and be, realistic, keeps it from being a free for all. But I will say there are certain meetings where an agenda isn't necessary and in fact might work against you. Typically, though, these are not meetings that have facilitators. Let me give you a classic example, a stand-up meeting. A stand-up meeting is where a team, an intact team of, say, 8 people, 10 people, whatever the number is, they get together every day or once a week, and they update each other on the progress they're making on projects that have an impact on the entire team. And in those meetings, since it's exactly the same thing, a round robin of quick updates from each person, there's no need to have an agenda. And with intact teams that routinely meet, there's another type of meeting. It's the team planning meeting. That one also might not need an agenda, at least not ahead of time. A real-time agenda might be better suited for that kind of a meeting. Again, no facilitator needs to necessarily be in this one, but you might find that everybody having some facilitation skills serves the group well. A real-time agenda, what happens there is that everyone comes in, they talk about their number one priority, and after you've heard the number one priorities from everyone, you do some analysis together about which of these items are important for all of us to be discussing together. And by doing that, pretty quickly, you have your agenda. This is relevant for all of us. These items can be pushed out into an email or into a smaller subset group. As I'm talking about these types of meetings and some of these particulars about meetings, I want to point you toward another resource. It's an ebook called 10 Fixes for Miserable Meetings. There's also a free course on People First Leadership Academy by the same name. The ebook goes a lot more in depth. Either one of those will give you some additional insights into meetings in general, not so much about facilitation, but about the kinds of things that everybody who participates in meetings probably ought to know and can do a better job with. Okay, so let's pick a setting. Maybe it has to be Zoom because that's the only option we have. But that setting, with everyone coming into Zoom, it ought to have some parameters. Are we on camera or off camera? Are we okay with casual, or do we all want to look like we're showing up at the office? Is it okay to have some background stuff? Because let's face it, work from home means that there's real life and maybe it encroaches sometimes. Or are we going to do something a little more buttoned down and formal? No dogs, no kids, no windows where something else could be happening. We don't want to see your garbage truck go by. So, pick the setting, make some agreements with each other. And if there's going to be any pre-work, including thought work, I want people to come prepared to talk about X. Give people ample time so that they can come into the meeting prepared. The types of meetings, I've touched on a few of them. Let me give you a bigger picture here. A facilitator should know. The outcomes will often help define it. What type of meeting is this? Are we looking to be deep dive, or are we looking to be update, pretty low level kind of stuff here? Just updates. Is this a one-to-one meeting? In which case a facilitator is not appropriate, by the way. Or is this focused on training? Is this focused on motivating people like a rally would? Is this focused on advancing a project forward? What is it in terms of type of meeting? Knowing what else is in a meeting, what the topics are, can help a facilitator to serve those outcomes and to keep the meeting and the length and the depth of the content appropriate. And when it comes to structure, there's even more that can help a facilitator. Right? Somebody ought to be thinking about this. Is it your facilitator who's thinking about it, or is it the leader of the meeting? You'll decide. Your workplace culture will inform you on this. Some leaders really like to have everything be very, very formal. They rotate these roles. They might, in some cases, have the facilitator and the timekeeper being the same person, or in some cases, have that be two completely separate roles. So, thinking about structure, that will help firm up your meetings. It will help you to do a better job in clarifying what's expected and who's doing what. And it will give your facilitator a better shot at success, because this isn't all dependent on the facilitator. Certainly, the meeting leader's expectations ought to be a part of that. You may notice that I'm referring to the meeting leader as separate from the facilitator. That may or may not be the case. Oftentimes it is. What I mean by meeting leader is the person who called the meeting, the person who has the greatest need. Often it's the person who is senior most within the group, but it doesn't have to be. So I'm giving you a lot of terms here that you could interpret differently, and that's okay. It means different things in different places. But it's why I recommend that you do that deeper dive with the 10 Fixes for Miserable Meetings in the book or in the workshop format, because it'll help you to put a little more structure and thought into all these small things that add up in big ways to make your meetings more effective. All right, now I'm going to start next with some other ways that you can solve the issues that you might be having within your group. Some of these are best served by a facilitator, but I want to be very careful in how I say that. A facilitator isn't your end all be all total fix. There's also this little thing known as meeting culture. So, a facilitator walking into a situation where they're climbing uphill against the meeting culture is going to need to justify some of the decisions that they make. A meeting facilitator can help you change your meeting culture, but it won't happen in a single meeting overnight. A meeting facilitator might begin by telling people why some of these little things are so important. Meeting facilitator might say, hey, one of the things that's happened here in our meeting culture is that we set a meeting time at the top of the hour, but we never really start until 10 minutes later. People sort of come in onesie twosie. We're having the side conversations, some of the casual stuff. And as people leave one meeting that ended at the top of the hour and they find their way eventually to this meeting, there's a lot of stuff going on in between. And so we start at 10 after, but we never really have everyone's full attention for another 10 minutes after that. And it's a problem. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to start our meetings at 15 minutes after the hour. But I expect in exchange for that 15-minute swing time, that passing time, that people do show up, because whether one person's here or 10 people are here, we are going to start on time. And we're not going to backtrack and catch you up. You're going to miss out. So there might be a reset of the culture, but justify it and explain why. And be sure it's a valid reason, not just an ego thing that causes you to do what I'm describing. Okay, for those who are here live, I am appreciating your questions and your comments along the way. I'm answering them so far as they come, but I want to let others know that. Don't wait till the end. We might not have a lot of time at the end. So post the questions as they come up. Other sorts of tips, right? Facilitators, others in the meeting culture ought to take into account are things like what agreements do we have between each other? Is it okay in our meetings if people are on their devices and what was that? Sort of paying attention, or is that not okay? And we have an agreement that devices are down for the duration of the meeting. Or maybe it's some medium. Maybe it's every time we meet for more than 30 minutes, we're taking a 5-minute check break so that people can check their devices. Figure out what you want and what will serve the needs of the group and the outcome, and then do put some parameters, try some things, experiment, see what works, because the whole idea here is to reduce that feeling of being a lack of productivity and a waste of time to be in your meetings. If there are multiple topics on your agenda, best practice is to start with the most important. Don't do a lot of check stuff and then expect people to fully focus on the important thing when it comes. While you were doing that check stuff, their emails were still coming in. Their thoughts were wandering. Their priorities were getting set. And now, under the gun with less time, you've gotten to the most important topic, and people aren't really able to make that kind of a quick shift in the limited time that remains. Don't be afraid to inject a little humor, a little positivity, a little fun into the meeting, but be careful with any activities or fun sorts of things that you introduce. Be sure they serve a purpose. Is the purpose to break the ice, to get people's focus, to make a point that's going to be relevant to whatever you're offering? Fun for the sake of fun may not belong in every meeting. It may be part of what causes people to feel like the meetings are unproductive if there's too much of that and if it seems pointless. And definitely, with or without a facilitator, create a practice of putting up a parking lot. A parking lot is a whiteboard or it's whether it's in Zoom or whether it's in a real room, it's a place where you capture the tangents. Somebody asked a question or said, "Oh, but what about?" And it wasn't serving the outcome that you came to this meeting for, but it was important. We want to dignify that. We want to let people know that we're going to do something with it, just not now. So it goes on the parking lot. And after the meeting, what's on the parking lot either becomes a separate meeting or it becomes a follow up, it becomes a subgroup. Something else happens to make sure that what's on the parking lot does get addressed in a more appropriate way. Now, back to you as facilitators. I'm giving you this context. These are all the things that sort of swirl around the facilitator, and they have to be looked at because, we don't want to be unrealistic here. But let's talk about the facilitator and what the facilitator can do to promote productive discussion. And I should say what the facilitator and the meeting leader, and even you, the person attending the meeting, can do to help promote some productive discussion. First of all, do we have the right people? Do we have the people who are needing to be there for a decision if the outcome is a decision? Do we have the right people there to give us the frontline insights and contributions if we're at that stage where we need to consider that before we get to a decision? And have we invited only the people who really need to be there, not just everyone, because too many people, well, if I don't belong in this meeting and there are 5 of me who do the same job in this meeting and I don't really need to be here because my colleagues will say the very same thing that I would, then let one of us instead of all 5 of us be there. Let us build trust so we can represent each other's ideas and take questions back to the group and advocate for the needs of the group. Because we have shared goals and the people in the meeting have shared goals and we can have some healthy conflict. We don't need to have every single person there because that wastes a lot of time and ultimately that costs a lot of money. We still want to hear all voices, but it's not absolutely essential for every single person to be there in order for their ideas to be championed and heard. This is part of the pre-work. If you are the selected appointee representing your group, your pre-work was to go and get some preliminary thoughts from your group and then to fairly and fully represent those. After the meeting, there are also things that facilitators and others can do. I'll just put them all up here for you at once. There's some recap. If certain people weren't able to be there, they need to know what happened. There are action items. Oh, I hope that there are action items. There really should be. At the end of the meeting, there's got to be time held reserved for who's doing what and having a common, mutually agreed upon plan, a path forward about who's going to do what and by when, so that when you come back to the next meeting, it's not just as if that first meeting never happened. We're just rehashing and stuck in limbo. Once you have the action items and people go forth and conquer and come back and report and you've made enough progress, eventually you'll get to a decision. And that decision should be one that everyone agrees will be communicated in a certain way within a certain time frame so that it cascades across the organization in a cohesive way, not a way that causes conflict and some people heard sooner than others. You might also want your facilitator to be thinking as an observer. What is it that others in the meeting could do to make meetings better? When you have discussion topics, here's a great thing that facilitators can do. They can think about these 4 discrete steps with any decision. They can get the buy-in, they can get the conversation started so that there's commitment, and they can build consensus by making sure that all voices are heard. And when it comes time for a decision to be made, the facilitator can advance the conversation toward that place because the voices have been heard, consensuses have started to build, and the facilitator can help to spotlight and ask questions about and dig for the variables that are going to make for a good decision, not a quick or hasty one, a really solid one. Facilitator can then shift you toward action planning, who's doing what, by when, what are the commitments, and eventually How do we cascade this communication throughout the organization in a cohesive way? Let's talk a little bit more about this action planning piece. Here's what it could look like. My recommendation, this is at the end of a meeting, any meeting, when there's a decision or an action item or something that needs to be done. The decisions and the action items are written down so everyone can see them. And then the facilitator or the leader, somebody, is talking about what needs to be communicated. And as soon as there's a discrepancy in either of those items, somebody calls it out. You demand that of others. In fact, you don't want people to be making decisions or leaving a meeting with an implied agreement that isn't really there. So as soon as there's any discrepancy, that gets called to the attention of the facilitator, and the conversation either goes back to where it needs to, or the facilitator gets the clarity that's needed so that people are, in fact, being able to move forward. Once you get there, though, you're all on the same page, you're ready to take action, then that common understanding unifies the team, and you bring that back together so that it's in a positive place. You make sure to wrap up with any questions that lacked clarity, that needed that resolution that I was describing, because that's what you have to do in order to really get commitment and to get people moving forward. So let me come back to a recap here. The job of a facilitator is to improve the quality of meetings. I've been scattershot all over a lot of different ideas here about what it is facilitators do to improve the quality of meetings. What you see on screen is mostly a recap of that. Ultimately, the skills needed by a facilitator are the skills required to get to this place where you've got these business meetings that are better than they used to be. Business meetings that help people feel that the meeting has been productive, that it was time well spent, that the action items have a legitimate shot at moving forward, so that we can reach those outcomes that we came into the meeting with a desire to achieve. Okay, now I told you there's a whole lot more over there on People First Productivity Solutions. I strongly encourage you to look at the People First Leadership Academy and find the 10 Fixes for Miserable Meetings free workshop. You can go to Amazon and get the ebook by the same title. When you're at People First Leadership Academy, I also want to strongly encourage you to take a look at the course, the certification course for meeting facilitators. It's not an easy one. People who earn that certificate have really done some solid work. They've done some solid work around demonstrating that they can develop and utilize the competencies of effective meeting facilitators. Let me put it on screen for you here just a moment. Whoops, there it is. The Leadership Academy is peoplefirstpotential.com. And my website is peoplefirstps.com. If you want to hire me or one of our team members as a meeting facilitator, you could start there and see more about the services. Or you could just email me. I'm Deb Calvert, it's deb.calvert at peoplefirstps.com. If you have questions, if you want to know how to do more of this inside your own organization, we can talk about any of that. Our time today really flew by. I appreciate you being here. Go and get what you need to have good business meetings. Ultimately, people will so appreciate the work that you've done to equip them so that your meetings are better. There are probably fewer meetings. The meetings you have are more productive. They move the agenda forward. And those outcomes, they're real and they're realized. That's what we're aiming for here. Don't forget, whether you were here on demand or live, I always appreciate your comments, always appreciate a review, because it's what tells me what you want in the future, what we can do to continually improve. Take care, and hopefully I'll see you next month for the continuing series that we have here on Bright Talk.